Who's used a waffle iron?
Did you get the waffle
I
iron
have.
to be thematic with the movie? Nice.
I'm a waffle iron pro.
Okay, so when it says 2/3, that I fill 2/3 of it, what does that mean? Like the surface area or like depth?
Oh, I think it means like surface area because
Okay.
when you push it down, it
It'll
expands.
get-
Yeah,
alright.
and then like you have to use some like you have to put like some kind of a non-stick sometimes down.
I already treated the waffle.
Right on.
I downloaded the PDF of the Black & Decker waffle iron.
Matt, you turned your lab back on, right?
I think so. Yeah, yeah. We did a test.
All right.
Yeah, I used to be pretty into making waffles.
Really?
Is that why it appears in the movie, or was that the screenwriter or
think that's it.
novelist, I should say?
That was, I think it was my idea. I can't remember. We really did like write every word together, so it's sometimes hard to recall whose idea.
Is there a significance behind it being waffles, the waffle iron?
Yeah.
How did the idea come about? What was the genesis of the idea of the film?
There's like a couple different points of entry. We had I had a script about a girl that was working for the summer in Ocean City, Maryland, and it wasn't very good. It was okay.
What is Ocean City, Maryland?
It's a resort town on the
Okay.
eastern shore of Maryland. It's like the equivalent of Ocean City, New Jersey, or any of the sort of East Coast beach towns where there's a boardwalk, an amusement park, big condominiums. So it's a peninsula between the Chesapeake Bay and the Atlantic, and a place that I grew up going to as a kid with my grandparents. So I had this scenario.
Did you work there at all?
Yeah, I did. A couple summers. I worked in a breakfast spot making omelets and waffles. And,
The waffles.
but there were all these international students. Like they'd get a summer work visa and would hang out for 3 months. First time in the U.S. in Ocean City, Maryland. I always thought that was kind of interesting, an interesting scenario.
Did you convey any of this when you were working on the character? Was it part of the background of the performance?
Yeah, we talked about it, and the original was like, there was more of it on paper. There was like 15 pages in Ocean City with this character from Northern Ireland, Daragh's character.
What would that dynamic have been like? What was it conveying?
I don't know, what was it conveying?
What conveying?
What were the 15 pages in Ocean City about?
They were about, it was well, this would be pretty different to see Taryn without Kim and Ned and Abby, where she sort of moves into, where she's more like watching them, whereas in the Ocean City thing, you're sort of like seeing Taryn independent, which, you know, doesn't work out. She doesn't do it very well. She gets pregnant, right? We filmed the Ocean City stuff after the stuff in Baltimore, and it was really, really, really fun. We came back, right? We did Baltimore, and then we all went home for a couple weeks, and then came back to do 3 days in Ocean City, and you don't actually end up seeing it. You see it in the special features, but Taryn works at an arcade, and Matt left me in the arcade for the afternoon.
The train.
Everyone else went out to have fun, and he wanted me to, like, you know, actually look like I worked in the arcade. It's like, I can learn this in half an hour, let me come back and join everyone else. But then it actually ended up being a dream, because I had, as an employee, I had like a little like key that could just play any arcade game. So instead of working, I just played every arcade game and I got so many tickets won so many tickets, and I did Deal or No Deal, and I won the grand prize of Deal or No Deal, and so all of the tickets started coming out, and then I've got crazy prizes for all the crew. Like squirt guns and fake tattoos.
Yeah, if we'd had more time, I would have tried to get you to work there for, a few days.
For better prizes, so you would get better prizes.
Yeah.
Is it important having that knowledge of what happens? Because Matt's films tend to like begin in media res and they kind of end before even bigger events even. Is it important to know that or to have that experience of what happens before the movie starts?
That's an interesting question. Yeah, I mean, a big thing that we talked about was like, what was Taryn's motivation for leaving Northern Ireland for coming to the United States? And I think we were saying that it's like, it's not a logical thing. It's not like, I'm going to come to the United States and I'm going to do this. It's like a very romantic notion. So the idea of a character like leaving the place they came for a place that they just like think might be better is obviously like that shows a lot of idealism and romanticism in the character. That she's like not searching, she's just basically searching for like something else. And I think that's definitely like she is super lost, but has like a desire to be around Ned and Kim and Abby because they're like artistic. She's like has artistic desires without like any real artistic aspirations.
Yeah.
It's kind of harsh.
I never thought about that, actually. That was something you must have conceived of for the character.
I feel like that was very early when we were writing emails.
We were talking about that?
Yeah.
What about you, Hannah? Your character seems more dependent on context than actually maybe knowing the backstory.
Yeah, I think so. I think what I was thinking about it just now is that really Abby and Bill are the only characters whose motives are clear and their reactions are clear in the film. With definitely with Taryn and then even with Kim, I think it's sort of harder to understand where they're coming from immediately, or could be more ambiguous what led them to react in a certain way.
Taryn and Kim?
Yeah, it's not very clear, but I think with Abby, you can see how she's got from point A to point B,
Yeah, that's a strong line, kind of. There's a logic there.
Yeah.
A lot of the people writing about the film almost exclusively focus on the aunt and the uncle as opposed to your performances, which I found odd. Like, do you have any ideas why they're gravitating? Like, I know it's like a structuring thing, and those are the ones that you maybe get the closest to. But I mean, if they're not the protagonists necessarily.
No, I feel like there's no single protagonist. It's a shared responsibility. It bounces from character to character. I mean, Taryn's set up as the protagonist, but then isn't really. And the world isn't seen through her eyes exclusively either. So it's not like you're just a device to get to the...
Yeah, I think we
story
talked
in
about
Baltimore.
her once as like a vehicle with which like you start with her and you like go with her through the story. And then she kind of becomes a part of their world by the end of it.
Yeah. I'm not sure why. I mean, I feel like audiences respond frequently to Hannah and Dara's characters, and like, I don't know, come up to me, and I'm sure to you too, and articulate their response. Because I feel like your characters are really like, grounded and believable and relatable. But maybe the clear conflict is the disillusion of this marriage between this couple. So maybe that's like, in terms of like plot, the thing to grab onto.
Yeah, I guess
Maybe
they're
a
the
little
drama and we're reacting
Yeah.
to it.
Yeah, and you have your own dramas, but they're sort of
Yeah.
But mine-
aside, a little more muted.
Yeah.
Like using the word like going with a character or moving with a character, because all of your films tend to seem to be about passage, especially this film. There's a lot of framings of passageways, and Hamilton in particular, there's a lot of movement through space. What was it like blocking this film? It seems like I saw Nick Pinkerton write something where he said that there was an actorly awareness of space or something like that.
That's very nice. Cool.
Yeah.
I think he was talking about, it was in a review of Blue Ruin, but he was talking about how you shoot space and it used to be darker.
Yeah.
What was the blocking like in the film?
These look delicious, by the way.
This is,
Yes.
by the way, a test to make sure that I haven't screwed it up, and then we'll all have.
Okay.
I also read that the first.
I kind of like the idea of it being like 4 and us sharing each waffle. I think it's really sweet.
Yeah.
Well, the real thing is that I heard that the first waffle you make, kind of like the first yerba mate, is like not the best. Like,
Right.
you kind of maybe even want to throw it out, but this looked decent. Like it looked like.
Nina, you want to get in on
Yeah,
this?
come on.
No, I'm good.
You sure?
It's like the first pancake is never the best.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I want
Is
to.
that so?
Are we all going?
Yeah. Let's
Should we do it?
Okay, I haven't forgotten your
I like
question.
I like eating it like pizza.
But I'll take a bite before I answer.
Oh yeah.
Oh wow.
Whatever doesn't get better than that. It's really good.
Oh yeah. I can understand why your character wanted to make waffles.
I got so fucking angry.
Yeah, it's interesting you chose waffles because it's actually a turning point of the conflict, isn't it?
Mhm.
The
Yeah.
waffling. It's what makes Abby
attentive-
yell at Taryn.
attentive
Okay.
viewing.
And leave.
Mm-hmm.
That's the catalyst.
I do think a lot. I mean, I feel like there is something like maybe borrowed from the theater in the way that I work with actors in space. I'm not trained, but I did like, when I was coming up, I did a lot of theater. It was like my passion when I was in grade school and high school. I never directed theater, but I was in a lot of stuff. Never been in a film, but I don't know, I like trying to connect actors to the physical space of the environment. I like to see it, the environment, because I think it speaks volumes about the characters, but I also think it really grounds performance. And in a lot of my films, this maybe being the first exception, I was working with actors that are completely untrained, have never acted for the camera before. And, so I feel like connecting actors to space, whether it's, a kitchen and they've got a task, look for the waffle iron, make waffles, or pour yourself some coffee, or a living room where they walk in, turn on the television, do some push-ups or something like that, look out a window. It helps distract from the camera, which is, I think, can be a really oppressive force, that unblinking eye. I mean, I feel it right now. I got a couple cameras and I'm like aware of them always.
That house, though, is so amazing. Like, that house is a character in the film
Definitely.
in a weird way. And we all had so much affection for that house very quickly, too.
Yeah, we spent a week there.
Yeah.
And a week in Kim's house, yeah.
That's it.
It's just
We
long
spent a little over a week in.
I thought it was more than a week.
More in
Jack.
Jack's.
Yeah.
That house was kind of a windfall because I'd chosen one that I was living in at the time, but we would have had to do a lot of painting, a lot of production design. And Ned's friend, Ned who plays Bill, his friend Jack, who I knew, he offered his house, and it's beautiful. And we'd gone there anyway to like pick up some odds and ends our production designer had. And there was still lots of work to do, but a lot less. The house itself is attached or semi-detached, and it's 3 stories with a basement. There was kind of a jam space because he's a musician there already. And we used almost every room except his children's bedroom.
That's right.
And since we were there for
That was your office.
a week, that's right, consecutively, it helped, even though the film wasn't shot chronologically. We really lived in that space for a week, got to know it really well. But yeah, in terms of blocking, I always like try to cover the master, set the camera away from the actors, get the whole scene from beginning to end. And then if we need to go in for coverage or little details, we do that afterwards. But if the scene is like good, if the energy's there in the master, then it's like, I don't know, sometimes more exciting when it plays out in duration than if you're cutting it up. And
I mean, it tends to have
More traditional way.
shot durations as the other films, or it's close, but it seems like the shot distance is a little closer. I know that that's strange because a lot of both your previous films tend to emphasize very important shots by being distant from the characters. It seems like there's it's not close-ups, but it's closer.
yeah.
And it seems like that mirrors the story. It seems
Yeah.
like maybe it's a more personal story, or it's a is that something that you were considering when you made it, that this was going to be an evolution of the style, or?
Yeah, I wanted to go in closer even. Jeremy Saunier, my DP, wanted to shoot 235, and I was worried a little bit, but his suggestion to balance that and reintroduce some intimacy, I think, into the in the frame was to shoot the whole thing handheld, and I think that maybe that's where we get the sense that we're closer to the characters, because Jeremy's body is reacting to Ned when he smashes a guitar, or breathing a little bit. The frame breathes with him, which is nice. So I don't know if there's more close-ups or not, but it does feel closer. What do you guys?
Yeah, did you guys feel that proximity? I mean, you weren't smashing a guitar, but
Did we feel the proximity of
camera.
Jeremy?
Yeah.
Were you aware of him?
Jeremy is I think the least intrusive
Yeah.
person.
Even
So-
even in the scenes that we shot in Abby's bedroom, which was extremely tight and pretty suffocating space in the 100-degree Baltimore summer,
Yeah.
he was still. I mean, it was in those. There's some scenes that didn't make it into the movie that were actually pretty emotional, but he had this way of still remaining at a distance from us, even though we were actually probably less than a foot away from each other.
Yeah, that's really true.
I mean,
Just a real respect for space, for the people, for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, he really respects actors as a director, as a DP. He's a great director of actors, but he never directs actors as a DP,
Yeah,
which is really important.
that's right.
He might give me
He'll make
suggestions, but the
suggestions.
line of communication is usually pretty clear, pretty
Yeah.
direct.
I think that waffles should always be eaten like this,
In
like a pizza.
That's the waffle tray. I mean, did you feel like the blocking of some of those scenes, like when you're in the kitchen looking for the waffle iron, felt pretty? We have a lot of kitchen scenes. Felt pretty natural,
yeah,
of the world in a way, connected to the
I'd say
space.
so.
Yeah.
it's hard to remember exactly.
The way I kind of remembered I was working is it would be we're going to go do that scene, and it would be you and Jeremy. I mean, this, I guess, probably, I don't have that much experience, but it seems like a normal thing, that you guys would go and stand in that room for a while, and you'd figure out kind of what was going to happen. Where we were going to go, just before that scene. We shot that scene, and then you'd kind of tell us, and you'd see how it looked with us actually doing it.
Yep.
It's funny because the scenes that, well, I guess there really only was one that you just stopped and threw away. The one had more to do with the space than with anything else that was happening in it. The scene with you, where Taryn and Bill, Taryn's just tried to leave, tried to run away, and then tried to get back in the house, and Bill finds her, and they share a popsicle, but I was just a bystander looking.
You were across the street, though.
Yeah,
You were
I
going
was
to
making
have a
phone
phone
calls
call
across
with Ned on
Yeah.
screen. Yeah, we
But-
threw
but
that
it
out,
was-
but you're right. It did
But
have a lot to do
only
with
had
it.
to do with space, the space you were shooting in.
Yeah, the performance wasn't the problem. It was
Yeah.
just suddenly it didn't make sense anymore.
That actually happened a ton of times if you think about it. The scene in the kitchen that had at one point a lot of dialogue, and then instead like ended up just being like me washing peppers. And,
Right.
But even that, like, that's quite a lot of choreography, really.
Mm-hmm.
But we simplified that whole scene, which was super scripted. Sometimes we'd throw scenes that like were pretty wordy out the window because there was sometimes just like an abundance of dialogue that didn't really help move the story along or really, I don't know, get us any closer to the characters. There was that scene with you and Nick, Golden Boy, in the van that we tried to shoot at like 3 a.m. It was a long scene of dialogue. It was kind of jokey. It was very late. We'd shot in another location, and we were trying to get this, I don't know, this moment like of sort of like blooming friendship romance between Dara's character and Kim's blonde bandmate. I think we'd already shot the stuff in the train car, even though that chronologically came after. Yeah, but it was just like the dialogue didn't work. It felt like a sitcom. We cut the whole thing and just had you put your head on his shoulder, and that said the same thing. Yeah.
I just realized when talking about blocking, we forgot about like the most difficult scene of the entire film was the one in the pool where Jeremy is literally in the pool with the or he had like a raft.
It was on a raft.
On a raft in the pool, and with like Hannah and I, you see that we're like swimming in circles, saying that dialogue, and Jeremy's like moving around the pool with us.
Yeah.
That was wacky. Everyone was very scared.
Yeah, that was
People
scary.
were not happy that day.
No.
That was a terrible day because we had
It was a
two
bad
major
day.
pool sequences, one day, one night, and we really spent too much time on the day stuff, trying to get it right.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard. I gotta cut back on pool scenes,
I
I think,
know,
in
I
the
was
future.
just going to say for all your love of pools,
Pools
I don't
are-
know if it's worth it.
Pools look so awesome in movies.
It's
though.
true.
I know. There's always a pool scene or a swimming scene.
And also it's scary because there were like lights like built over the pool that like, I mean, I'm sure they were special lights that if they fell we wouldn't die.
Yeah. There were electric lights that you could submerge,
Okay.
but yeah, they weren't built into the structure of the.
Yeah, there were no pool lights, so you had to make our own. I didn't do it. But
What's it like working with the musicians? Because I read a quote where you said that musicians have a different awareness of their body maybe than traditional actors do. Could we maybe compare and contrast like the physicality of the two musicians?
I feel like musicians do have, just have a confidence. Even if they haven't done any acting before. They're aware of their body and space, the sound of their own voice. They have certainly like vocal control. And then also, I think the other big advantage is if they're studio musicians or have any experience in the studio, they understand like the compartmentalization of performance, which is called for on a film shoot. But also like if you're recording a track and you have to break it up into its like various parts and repeat them over and over again until you get them right. I feel like Ned's performance was like, in some ways, big physically, but also like his choices when it came to language, his willingness to improvise, to like riff, really surprised me. Was never inappropriate. I don't think he like threw off the performances of others in the scene, but it gave like a nice energy. He was like constantly like, I don't know, sort of like building his performance in the moment. And Kim's is more contained. She did a lot more preparation, I feel like, in certain ways, before the cameras would roll. She focuses a lot more attention on her hands. She has really interesting gestures, but that are kind of like minute and surprising. I like watching her hands.
Yeah, me too.
She would use her personal experience like a lot to
That's
do
true.
it. Like, she would go into, like I remember that scene where we're looking at the photo album on the bed. She like went away from everyone else for a little while, and said she was like thinking about how she'd feel if her son like wouldn't talk to her.
Mm.
Just made herself really, really, really sad.
And then she cried in the scene, which was unexpected. Yeah, she often needed like some time away right before we were gonna do a take to find that sort of emotional center. It's pretty cool.
What about first of all, are we done with the waffles? Because I've got 2 more.
No, I'm
I'll
not
have
done.
another.
All right, well, come up. I'm going to have you guys dress your own from here on out.
Right on.
Okay.
I feel like I'm underdressing them. So,
Oh yeah,
No.
go crazy.
Go
Want me to make a
crazy.
crazy waffle?
Yeah.
Just watch your live packs.
Got it.
And while we're doing that, we can discuss the self-conscious acting scene in the film, which I think is really interesting, and maybe everyone's
Mhm.
experience, both creating it but also producing it, what that scene meant for you guys in the film. Because,
The Ophelia scene?
yeah.
Yeah. Actually, that was something that.
Shakespeare's free.
Yeah, that might be.
Logged on to
true.
Project Gutenberg. So.
That came together. That was kind of a last-minute change, like between the draft of the script we ended up shooting and the drafts prior. Originally, I'd put in this like text from a play by Strindberg, Dream Play, which I really like,
Oh,
and it
that's
was
great,
kind of
yeah.
it was this monologue from the character, she's like sort of an alien or angel that descends to heaven, and like that was the monologue I wanted, and I don't know, I've always liked it, but it didn't really work for Amy ever, so she suggested Ophelia, and
No, before that it was a song from Into the Woods.
I had the idea that you were going to sing at one point. First it was Dream Play, then it was a song from Into the Woods. Was that actually in the script?
That you sang in high school.
That's right, on that stage. So this is a very meta scene. That's my high school, that's the stage that I like performed on, and performed this role of the baker in Into the Woods when I was like in 10th grade. So I wanted to get Hannah on that stage, Abby on that stage. I don't know what, you didn't choose Ophelia, did you? I think it was
No, it
Amy's
was
choice, and
Amy,
but you were comfortable with that, more
Well,
comfortable than
her turn.
singing. Right, I know it's not Ophelia.
Yes, because I am entirely tone deaf, so it probably wouldn't have been believable that I was in a musical. But also, you just scrapped that for the rights mainly.
Yeah.
I don't
Shakespeare's
know
public
why.
domain,
I
like
can't
said.
remember what the reasoning was for Gertrude.
We just liked it.
I think so, yeah.
It'd have been really intense if we each had a singing scene.
That would have been amazing. Well, that was the idea, that Abby was going to get her singing
My
scene.
time to shine.
When
Taryn
is
is
Taryn?
the only one with no voice.
Always clapping.
That's right. Was that fun to do, that scene?
I was very nervous about that scene.
That's fair.
Really, really nervous. I can't really remember why.
We made everybody
Well,
leave the theater
Yeah.
while you ran
Because
it.
the idea of, because it was, I mean, in film you're, especially in this film, the idea of performance is never there unless, other than the musical numbers, but to be performing as a performer.
Whoa.
It was really nerve-wracking
Mhm.
to think that that the crew would be watching me perform this Shakespeare monologue, and
Is
I
it because
suppose it
you are
brought
an
up-
actor?
pardon?
Is it because you are an actor?
Yeah.
You feel like it'll be if the performance would have been evaluated differently?
Yes.
Makes sense.
Because people knew I went to theater school, that I was afraid their standards of my performance would be really high.
So did you feel more like Hannah in that moment than in Abby? Like
No,
than Abby?
because otherwise I wouldn't have been able to do it, I think.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm more concentrated on the waffles than anyone else.
It's hard. It's very difficult to answer questions when these are here.
That's why we're going to into the deep recesses of your mind.
Exactly.
Did the musicians feel more self-conscious when they were performing musically because it's being documented and will live?
I don't think so. They never expressed any insecurity when they were performing the music.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, with the exception of maybe the the concert scene where Kim performs American Child. She was anxious about that because, not unlike you and your relationship to acting, she's a musician. We were filming a set and we needed like the audio to be a certain way, but we also wanted it to honor the space, and Kim really wanted to make sure it sounded good, like in the space as it would if she were like doing a real concert. So it became tricky, kind of like the lines of communication between Kim, the guy running the soundboard, who was like from the venue, and our sound guy, and just like making sure it worked for everybody. And especially worked for Kim and felt like natural. So those concert scenes, the Dope Body one too, the punk band that plays in the warehouse. It's funny, it's kind of hard to contrive a concert to like build the energy that would like be there if the thing were really happening in the world, and repeat it time after time for the camera. But worked out.
When we were talking about Shakespeare, I recalled that there's the Rilke quote in Hamilton.
Mm-hmm.
What is the importance of having these kind of illusions? Or we were talking about meta, like performers performing. What does that function serve for you?
Well, with the Rilke, I mean, I feel like I have a much more direct connection to that.
Which I could not read.
And to that, well, yeah, I feel like the one mistake of my youth was putting it in German, but I also it didn't connect directly to the film, but I felt like it was more a sort of statement about representation. It's a really beautiful untitled poem that starts, "What birds fly through is not the intimate space in which we see all forms intensified." And then it's about how like that doesn't come, you can't like construe the world until you like name it and say it and throw inner space. He goes, I'm paraphrasing now, but like a tree cannot be known in all its abundance unless you throw inner space around it. And then it's like, I don't know, something about seeing the world and to me the relationship between like the world and art, and it really connected to me, and it connected with me, still does. I like Rilke a lot. The Shakespeare, I mean, I'm actually not a student of Shakespeare. You know this. You are far more than me. But I like references, whether it's text. I mean, the text to Bill Callahan's song, Jim Cain, his music was a real source of inspiration, sort of guiding light when we were writing the script.
The UGK.
UGK as well. More spiritually connected to that, I would say, than anything else. But
a lot of people gravitate towards that title. Like, how early was the title existing on the story?
Well, with that album and that song, so Bill Callahan's "Sometimes I Wish We Were an Eagle" and the song "Jim Cain" was, kind of, once Amy and I figured out that we were writing about a divorce or like the end of a marriage, that album was on heavy rotation. So yeah, I think it was like, I love those lyrics. Just like, I've listened to that song so many times. They're like a part of my psyche. So I suggested it, and she was like, yeah, that's great.
It kind of goes with that space you were describing with the Rilke, because it's referring to, especially with the story, like a period of time beforehand that you don't know. Like the upbringing of the two characters, how they interrelate to one another, how they're separated, what the marriage was before it was divorce, and it kind of alludes to things that you will never know. And people kind of discuss this like lack of communication between characters, but also like what the audience may or may not be getting as information, which is even something that comes out in Putty Hill, like the actual investigation of like asking questions but not really getting concrete answers. How is that to perform characters like that are non-communicative to one another, to others, to the audience in some ways?
I feel like with Taryn, that was like one of the main ways that the character wasn't like me or something that was, and a way that Taryn and Abby's relationship isn't really like Hannah and my relationship, and like the care, like Taryn never like pushes Abby for answers or something. They never, she like has a lot of curiosity, but she certainly never asserts herself. So, I don't know, I like, in a way, it's a kind of fun thing to be able to perform watching other people is like, it's great because you can literally just be watching the other person and that takes up your attention, and when you're looking at them, you're not really thinking about what you look like when looking at them. You're thinking about what they look like. So, in a way that,
Yeah. I would say maybe in terms of character and self, it was the reverse for Abby and I. That I always pictured Abby, she's an only child. She's been a star child for a while, and so she would be someone who I assumed would be extremely verbal and articulate, and probably always had been. And then, it was like, which I am not. And so I was thinking that part of her frustration and anger is that comes from not being able to communicate, feeling like she doesn't want to communicate with her mother and can't communicate with her dad for whatever reason, because she doesn't want to hurt him. She's very delicate with him. So I think that like all that sort of like when it's like a child who can't speak yet and they act out, and is what
Well, can't speak about this like emotional space that her family is like.
Yeah, and that she also feels as though nobody's listening anyway, so.
Yeah.
With Kim though, isn't it a little bit that she's not speaking to Kim to punish her too?
Yeah, I mean like that she doesn't want to speak to her mother, but with, I think, I'm sorry, I've got really
So what's the
The food thing is like working to the effect you want. It's just us being like,
it's the sugar and waffles.
We're all just stupefied by your meal.
One thing I was thinking about when I was listening, and I was, is class and the concept of class and like how people are raised and where they're raised and how that informs. Everyone talks about the locations, but just specifically like what their parents are like, or how much money they've had, or what opportunities they've had. How important is that to conceiving of these characters?
I mean, class is really important to me as a person, as a filmmaker. I mean, I think about it a lot. It's something I've always sort of been obsessed with since I was a kid, like. And class signifiers and. Cheers. I didn't get you. I think that's because I grew up in a really like blue collar neighborhood. Both my parents are teachers. They sent me to a private school in an affluent suburb. And so as a kid growing up, I was spending a lot of time thinking about what you just said, like what my friends' parents did and why, because of the money their families had, they did different things, like their leisure time was spent differently. And there was this dichotomy between like my peers at school and then like the kids that I hung out with in my neighborhood. And so class became a sort of divider, but a designator too, so it was like something that I think about a lot as a writer, because communicating, to audiences, to people, and thinking about what tools we use to do that, and how they sometimes differ. And so Darker was like maybe more directly connected to those differences. I mean, I feel like Taryn's character and Abby's character, they come from very different backgrounds, but also Taryn comes from a very different place than like the kids she's surrounded by in Ocean City, Maryland. The house that Kim moves to is different than like the house in the neighborhood where she was living with Bill. So there's also this sort of their identification, Bill and Kim's identification with the creative class, if you can like, if there is such a thing, and like, Kim's ability to focus on her work, Ned's need to sort of focus on his own livelihood and his family, and the choices that they had to make. All that stuff seems to like, to me, to be really interesting stuff that Americans, I'm not alone, are like fixated on, and yet maybe we don't talk about a lot. And, I'm not doing it directly, I don't think, but it's there. Those questions, those signs, signifiers.
Isn't it still like kind of like a taboo to talk directly about class, like not talking about like their films about like racism, and it's also about like issues of class, but it seems like people aren't always very willing to talk about it directly or something.
It's still not supposed to exist in America. People are still like to hold that illusion.
And there's a big disconnect, I think, between the way people perceive themselves. I mean, there's like this broad middle class. Everybody's sort of a part of the middle class, but the like discrepancy between like the high and low end of that is great. And I think, well, that's true. So actually, there's no middle class. Yeah. It's just a gulf. But everybody, wants to sort of be part of the median, I think. And I don't know. It interests me. But it's true. Not something we talk about very well.
I feel like class difference that is interesting in Darker is like I grew up always knowing that I would go to university. Like that was an assumption, and I think that like a difference between Taryn and Abby would be that like you'd always have been expected to go to school. Like Abby's parents probably were always putting like money into an education fund, whereas I don't think Taryn grew up with that same assumption necessarily.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Yeah.
There's also a difference in how you relate to it as a filmmaker than I think definitely with Hamilton. Maybe not as much with Putty Hill, but it seems like Hamilton's almost like a Jonas Mekas film where like it's not ethnographic, but you're traveling, like you're in a space, like you're kind of documenting it. It does seem to have like a distance there. Whereas in these films, it seems more like you're working with it, and I think with Darker, like maybe even more commenting upon it. Like there's more of an authorial voice that seems to come through.
Interesting. Jonas Mekas is a big inspiration, and certainly when I was thinking about how to make a film, I was thinking about him a lot. So to see that influence, to make that comparison is cool.
At what point are you kind of participating or commenting? Like, how does it change? Like, how does your involvement change as the filmmaker? I know that people have compared Putty Hill to Pedro Costa, and he was kind of famous for working with like people, real people, and turning them into kind of actors, like they're performing. But what is your relationship with the subject matter in that sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm trying to get closer, maybe closer to my characters, closer emotionally. I mean, I'm trying to like, I guess, write about things are a little more personal. Whereas Hamilton was like an attempt to try to like represent this place where I grew up, that I hadn't lived in for 7 years on film, and explore some sort of dominant themes of this community. And Putty Hill, it was like more directly inquisitive and collaborative, I would say, you know, asking questions of the actors who are performing as versions of themselves, who are contributing like a lot of personal history, as well as like imagining, taking on some of the sort of authorial responsibility and voice, and shaping the story. Yeah, I'd like to keep figure out how to get closer, because I'm not really interested in like taking an ethnographic or anthropological stance in relation to subjects. And I'm not really that interested in realism either anymore. So I don't know, I think it's through the personal, like the emotional, that you can sort of shed the responsibility of whatever cinematic realism is, and engage in creating kind of like new myth, which is like more exciting.
Do you guys distinguish between realism and naturalism when you're making these films?
Mm-hmm.
Like, is there? I mean, naturalism has its own function in theater. It's different, I guess. But like, if we can maybe try to distinguish between your lack of interest in realism, but still working naturally.
Well, what's it mean in the theater?
It is kind of synonymous of like, you know, acting in a way that is understandably not heightened, like, and that can happen in film, but it seems like it's always equated with a visual aesthetic that is also realistic, but versus like say a naturalistic portrayal of these characters, but with an aesthetic that's not necessarily rooted in realism.
That's interesting, that combination, I think.
Isn't it like, just so far as the terms go, isn't realism referring more to the story and the situation, and naturalism is referring more to performance?
I'm comfortable
Right,
with that.
like you can have, like you can have a like a naturalistic dream sequence.
Yeah. So it would also, I think, pertains to like the lighting, for example,
Sure.
which we definitely
Like
we like to uphold a naturalistic approach to lighting, using available light, mimicking it with artificial light, and that's
It's like you could call Celine and Julie. You wouldn't call it
naturalistic.
realistic, but you can call it naturalistic.
Yeah, that's a good.
I'm very happy with our new definition. It's good.
Your definition.
I'm happy with my definition.
No, there is a distinction. I mean, I think
Yeah.
realism is like impossible. I mean,
Yes,
You know,
it's just not real.
yeah.
But it's privileged so much now, right? Like even
I know.
comic book movies have to be realistic. Like they're
Yeah.
not liked if they're not considered to be realistic portrayals of
Yeah.
someone in a suit that is
Right.
seldom
Yeah.
crafted.
Or it has to be realistic, or it has to be absurd.
Yeah.
Like there's no
There's-
middle ground.
Yeah.
hmm The fun thing about film is that it's just it's a representation of reality, a reflection. So it's like in that reflection, in the adaptation, there's the potential to do like all these exciting things. And
Be a different reality.
yeah. So it's somewhere in there, and that will hopefully, I don't know, continue to like shift and change. I mean, I think, for me, I draw inspiration from a number of filmmakers who you could sort of, categorize as making films that are, I don't know, working in traditions of realism or naturalism, from Bresson to Pedro Costa, Mike Lee. But then I'm also like really drawn to David Lynch, who, I don't know, does he have a naturalistic approach to whatever,
I think you could
whatever
even
sort
call
of
that like
dreams?
realism, but not naturalism.
I don't know. There's so many ways to do it. Hopefully, you just keep trying new things. Hopefully, I can keep trying new things as a filmmaker, and other people will too, and the conversation will stay interesting.
What are you trying right now?
I'm trying to get like more personal, but less real, like really trying to blur the lines between reality and fiction. It's a story about a guy who's kind of like walking that line between sort of meaning and total meaninglessness, and the sort of film begins and ends in the same place in a certain way, though his journey, has a kind of arc, and I think he sort of changes over the course of the film. The whole midsection could be real, might not be real, might just be his imagination. And then there are dream sequences involved. So I'm working on dreams. But the whole middle could be a dream, but I don't think it is. But it's grounded in like a kind of certain reality, but it pushes further into like pure fiction and the imagination. And is like, I don't know, it's been really fun to write. Yeah. I'm excited about it, we'll see. And I don't know.
Thank you guys.
Hey.
Waffles.
Thank you.
They're great.
Thank you.